All right, and we back on the forecast. So in Atlanta, a 22-year-old brother, Deravis Caine Rogers, who was unarmed, was shot in the face by Atlanta police. So let's go back and see how this young brother could end up getting shot in the face by the police.
New details in a deadly officer-involved shooting. 22-year-old Deravis Rogers was unarmed when he was shot in the head. The Atlanta officer who pulled the trigger, James Burns, was fired, and now we know why. Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon Reed.
And I'm Ben Swan. Now, police say that Officer Burns used deadly force when it was unnecessary and unreasonable. Vince Sims has been poring over the investigation documents. He joins us now live. Vince, police say that the officer's account of what happened, what he claimed took place, does not match his video.
That's exactly right. Officer James Burns responded to a foot pursuit call, and when he made it there, he said that he shot at a car that was leaving that scene. Well, the thing is that the police are saying the video doesn't match what he's saying.
Officer James Burns is officially terminated from the Atlanta Police today. According to internal documents obtained by CBS 46, the reason for the emergency action is maltreatment or unnecessary force.
We could not support him after looking at the evidence and hearing the officer's statement. That's just not a shooting that the department could stand by.
June 22nd, Officer Burns responded to a foot pursuit call at Monroe Apartments. As he pulled into the area, he saw a car pulling out from the wrong side of the street. Burns says he tried to block the car's exit, jumped out yelling stop before firing the deadly shot through the passenger window, killing Deravis Rogers. In the internal affairs questioning, Burns told investigators, quote, "He's clearly made a decision to run me over, and kill me. And I'm thinking about, I got to protect myself." Burns said in another answer, "I remember thinking, wow, he's actually trying to kill me." Investigators say dash cam video tells a different story. In the written report, investigators say to Burns, directly following the shot, you can be seen on the dash cam video of another responding officer's patrol vehicle walking from behind your patrol vehicle toward the location where the vehicle you shot into had just passed. The internal affairs investigation also told Burns, you attempted to conduct an investigatory stop of the driver of this vehicle without having reasonable suspicion that the driver had engaged in or was about to engage in criminal activity.
The force that the officer used was not reasonable, nor was it necessary. And that, in essence, steps outside our policies governing the behavior in which an officer would deploy his weapon or discharge his weapon.
These findings fall in line with questions the victim's father had about what happened to his son.
It didn't feel right. And once I saw my body with the actual gunshot wound, I'm like, something is really, really wrong here. Something is really.
All right, now that the firing comes from the APD's internal investigation, the GBI is doing their own investigation. They'll turn over their findings to the Fulton County District Attorney's office, and that office will decide if any criminal charges will be filed in the killing of this victim.
So this cop, Officer James Burns, was responding to a call from an off-duty cop who was working as a security guard in an apartment complex. And a lot of off-duty cops do security work in their off time. And you have to be careful with these off-duty cops because they still have their prejudice, even though they're off-duty. And this off-duty cop said there was a suspicious person walking around the neighborhood and appeared to be breaking into cars. He didn't actually see anybody breaking into cars. He just appeared to be. So when this cop, James Burns, get there, he sees his brother Deravis Rogers' car driving from the area. Now, keep in mind, this cop, James Burns, didn't know if this brother was the suspect or if he even committed a crime at all. He didn't even know if there was a crime committed. All they said was it was somebody who appeared to be breaking into cars, not that they were actually doing it. And his brother Deravis Rogers most likely didn't even have a record because that's the first thing they would have said. So this cop, James Burns, claimed that he tried to block his car in when he saw him leaving the area. But he said this young brother didn't comply, as a good Negro should. And he claimed that this brother was driving towards him like he was trying to hit him. So he claimed that he feared for his life and had no other choice but to open fire, shooting his brother in the face. Now the problem for him, another cop dash camera contradicted everything about his story. Investigators said this brother Deravis Rogers never tried to hit him with a car. In fact, a dash camera saw this cop coming from behind his car, completely out of the path of this brother Deravis Rogers. and then stepping behind his brother's car after he had already passed and opened fire. Investigators even said this cop had no information describing this brother Deravis as the suspect, or that he was a threat to the cop or anybody else. He didn't even have information that this brother was the right person who was the suspect who was supposed to be breaking into cars. This brother posed no threat and was nowhere near hitting this cop with his car. Now, eventually, they did charge this cop with aggravated assault, making false statements, and violating his oath of office. But 2 years later, after he was fired and charged, the DA Paul Howard dropped the charges.
Murder indictment against the Atlanta police officer who shot and killed a 22-year-old has now been dismissed.
The shooting was the subject of Monroe Drive, 11 Alive's digital episodic investigation, and only 2 people knew exactly what happened that night. Officer James Rolfe Burns and 22-year-old Caine Rogers. Rogers did not survive the night. Jeremy Campbell is the reporter behind the docuseries. And Jeremy, what happened to change the course of the prosecution here?
Cheryl, court records filed on Wednesday in Fulton County show a notice of noel prosequi. Now, that translates from Latin as "we shall no longer prosecute." The Fulton County DA, Paul Howard, calls that a procedural matter. He says that this case is still ongoing, but that the murder indictment is dismissed. Howard says that a recent appeals court case led to questions about how statements from police officers can be used in a grand jury. So Howard says, out of an abundance of caution, his office is choosing to re-indict the entire Burns case. Now, that case centers on June 22nd, 2016, when Officer Burns shot Caine Rogers to death on Monroe Drive. At first, police suggested that the 22-year-old was breaking into cars. Now, weeks later, police clarified that there was no evidence of any break-ins. After an internal police investigation, Burns was fired from the force and charged with murder. For the past 2 years, Burns has been out of jail on bond. We're the only TV station his wife Lindsay spoke with about what happened.
We never really got to be newlyweds. June 22nd happened, which really just shook our whole foundation. I think the only way anyone can handle this tragedy is just by going day by day.
Officer Burns' defense attorney, Drew Findling, says that this case was presented in an unconstitutional fashion. Findling says, quote, "We battled it, they defended it, and the case was dismissed."
So the DA said he will no longer prosecute out of an abundance of confusion. Now, he said the case wasn't over, it's just that he was going to drop the charges for now. The cop said the case presented against him was unconstitutional, and him and his poor wife never got to live as newlyweds. And even though this brother Deravis Rogers doesn't get to live his life, this cop has been out for 2 years on bail. But the DA did say the case wasn't over, and 2 years later, after the shooting, they decided to re-indict him.
A former Atlanta police officer charged once again with murdering a 22-year-old man. The Fulton County District Attorney announced today that a grand jury returned an indictment on 4 counts against Officer James Burns, including felony murder. So tonight, we're connecting the dots on how we got to this point again. A hot summer night, June 2016, 2 lives changed forever. Former Officer James Burns is investigating a potential car break-in suspect on Monroe Drive in Northeast Atlanta. 22-year-old Caine Rogers is leaving the area in his car. Burns believes Rogers is driving right at him, so he opens fire, shooting and killing Rogers. But Burns' story never added up to investigators. And less than a month later, on July 15th, the Fulton County District Attorney issues a warrant for Burns' arrest for the murder of Caine Rogers. Fast forward 2 years later, almost to the day, 11 Alive reports exclusively that District Attorney Paul Howard scraps the original indictment, but he announces plans to bring the case back before a grand jury. That happened on Wednesday. The grand jury re-indicts James Burns, charging him with felony murder, aggravated assault, and violating his oath as a police officer.
This was a quick decision by the grand jury. In less than 1 day of court, the jury re-indicted former APD officer James Rolfe Burns with a murder charge for the 2016 shooting on Monroe Drive.
Now, Burns' attorney tells us there was a constitutional problem with this last case. He says there are still problems with this case. He plans to file motions in the near future to keep fighting this in court. Meanwhile, Caine Rogers' mother was also in court today, but she told me she didn't want to make a comment.
So in one day, a grand jury decided to charge him with murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and violating oath of office after they decided to re-indict him. Years later, after this cop who was caught lying and had no reason to even bother this kid, let alone shoot him, they're still having trouble to even indict him, let alone going to trial or even being convicted of murder, especially when the victim is an unarmed black man. And years later, they still haven't gone to trial, and this man has been living his life walking free. And this black DA, Paul Howard, has done his fair share of caping for the cops. And that's why it's important for us when we vote not to just vote for a black face. If we don't have our own candidate there to push our agenda and to get things done for our community, then there's no point of voting. Our ancestors didn't die just to get us the right to vote, because it's meaningless if we don't have a candidate there for the best interest of our own community. We need to be focused on building our own community, to rebuilding our own economics, and most importantly, protect what we build. And if we put aside our tribal differences, we can easily rebuild our economy, but we have to be on code. Right now, we can nominate the most successful black businessmen and women to be in charge of funding and growing black businesses. And we all can contribute. And when we build our own economy, we can build our own schools. We can put officials in positions that we need officials in. But until we put aside our tribal differences and get on code, then we're going to continue to be subject to their rules, their laws, and their punishments. And there's nothing we can do about it. They can continue to shed our blood, and even if they are charged, they could still not get punished for it. At the end of the day, we are all we got. And until we do what we got to do, we're going to continue to get the same results.
It was a deadly confrontation between a Philadelphia man and a police officer. Now, for the first time in about 2 decades, authorities are charging the now former Philadelphia police officer with criminal homicide for the police-involved shooting. Eyewitness News reporter Joe Holden is outside the district attorney's office with additional details about this controversial case. Joe, good evening.
Yuki, good evening. It was June 2017, and this was all over a dispute involving a dirt bike. An officer saw a man on a dirt bike and believed that was cause to pull him over. Well, a struggle ensued, and that man on the dirt bike took off. This presentment from the grand jury outlines the rest of the allegations. It writes, David Jones, that man was no danger to anyone in his flight. His death was not necessary to secure his apprehension, an apprehension that would never have been necessary if the officer, Ryan Pownell, had not incited the confrontation. Charged with homicide, former Philadelphia police officer Ryan Pownell now has to answer for the June 2017 killing of a man named David Jones. Prosecutors say Pownell encountered Jones on a dirt bike near Whitaker and Hunting Park. He stopped him and frisked him, apparently detecting a firearm. A struggle followed and Jones fled.
As Jones ran, unarmed, Pownell fired at least 3 shots toward Jones and traffic, hitting Jones twice in the back. Jones's body was searched at the scene. No gun was recovered on his person.
Prosecutors acknowledged Jones threw his gun away during the confrontation. The Fraternal Order of Police, surrounded by members of Pownell's family and his lawyer, issued a blistering response.
Today's meritless indictment clearly illustrates a district attorney who has an anti-law enforcement agenda.
He encountered someone who was armed with an unlawful pistol, pulled that pistol from his waist. A struggle ensued. Officer Pownell was justified in his actions that night.
Those who long protested Pownell's deadly actions that June night gathered outside the DA's office, condemning the department for allowing Pownell to continue working on the force despite allegations of a litany of complaints.
That the city of Philadelphia failed David Jones. This killing was preventable.
Now, Pownell was arraigned at 4 o'clock this afternoon by a Philadelphia judge. His family, the lawyer representing Pownell, are hoping to have this count reduced at the preliminary hearing phase.
For the
first time we're hearing from JSO after a joint investigation by the Florida Times Union and ProPublica. Their investigation, titled Walking While Black, found that JSO wrongfully ticketed pedestrians for not carrying a driver's license.
So as a result of that reporting, JSO investigated the claims and found them to be true. Our Honey Rodriguez joins us live from JSO headquarters to explain what this means moving forward. Honey.
That's right, Anthony. JSO is in the process of voiding those 6 citations. They're telling their officers not to give pedestrians a ticket for when they don't show their driver's license. Now, I caught up with Devante Shipman, whose video with a JSO officer went viral back in June for receiving a similar citation. Take a listen.
Now people can be a little more comfortable walking down the street and not feel like, oh, I'm going to get stopped and get ticketed if I don't have my ID.
You might remember this video of 21-year-old Devante Shipman and a JSO officer who gave Shipman a ticket for breaking a Florida statute, not carrying or presenting a license, according to JSO. But Florida law says you only have to hand it over to identify yourself if you're driving when the officer asks for it, not simply walking across the street. Shipman's ticket was eventually dropped. Today, JSO says they're dismissing 6 other tickets issued for the same reason. In a statement from JSO, it says officers will receive remedial training, and a bulletin was issued to the entire department explaining the Florida statute, which only applies to motorists.
Stop taking people's way of making a living away, their license, their driving license. So no, this is not enough.
Community activist Wells Todd says more needs to be done, and he and other civil rights activists say JSO is racial profiling, and they're calling for a stop of all pedestrian-related citations.
Despite all of our sincere efforts to reach out to the sheriff to discuss this walking while black controversial problem with him, he is still hiding out in the police memorial building.
Sheriff Mike Williams previously commented, saying there hasn't been any targeting of African Americans or poor communities when it comes to writing the pedestrian violation tickets.
I'm just exposing JSO and what they do, you know what I mean? And the lack of what they do know if they're supposed to be an officer.
It is a scenario that's hard to believe. An Auburn man tries to cash a check at his own bank and winds up in jail.
And the King 5 investigators have learned the check in question was issued by the very bank that claimed it was a forgery. Linda Byron exposes a series of bank errors that left a new homeowner reeling.
I was really excited. For the first time, I actually got to buy a lawnmower and mow my lawn and everything.
Buying his own home was a big accomplishment for construction worker Ikena Njoku. He's only 28 years old. Njoku qualified for the first-time home buyer rebate on his tax return.
It was really important. I mean, I had a vehicle that I was looking on paying off.
It wasn't just any vehicle.
I had a 2001 Infiniti i30. Silver. Is just like my favorite car.
Njoku signed up to have the rebate deposited directly into his Chase bank account. But when the IRS rebate arrived, there was a problem. Chase had closed his account because of overdrawn checks in the past. The bank deducted $600 to cover what he owed them and mailed him a cashier's check for the difference, $8,463.21. When Njoku came here to cash the check at the Chase branch near his home, he was in for a nasty surprise. The check had his name and address right on it and was issued by J.P. Morgan Chase. But the customer banker who handles large checks at the Auburn branch was immediately suspicious.
I was embarrassed. I mean, she asked me what I did for a living, and asked me where I got the check from. Looked at me up and down like, oh, you just bought a house in Auburn, really? It's like she didn't believe that.
The banker says the check looked fake, so she took it, along with Njoku's driver's license and credit card, and called bank support. Njoku says after about 15 minutes, he got impatient and told Chase he was leaving to do an important errand.
By the time I got back, the branch was closed.
Njoku says he called customer service and was advised to go back the next day to get his money. But when he arrived, it wasn't his money that was waiting for him.
Hey, they just threw me in jail. They called the police and said, This guy has a fraudulent check.
Auburn police arrested Njoku for forgery, a felony crime.
I was just like, whoa, you're making a mistake, you know? You're making a big mistake. You know, don't take me to jail, you know? I got work tomorrow. You know, I can't afford to miss work.
Njoku was taken to jail on Thursday, June 24th. The next day, Chase realized its mistake. So they called and left Auburn police a voice message. But no one heard it. Njoku stayed in jail for the entire weekend. Finally, on Monday, he was released.
We weren't involved until that next morning.
Police Commander Dave Colglazer says Chase could have done a lot more to let them know they'd locked up an innocent man.
You guys are fucking dick eaters. That's what you fucking are. I'm gonna record that on tape. You're fucking cock suckers. I'll take my $70 and I'll swallow that you guys are fucking cock suckers. Okay? I did not do shit. I stood there and laughed and the rest of the audience like I should. Okay? I did not disrupt anybody. That guy out there, which I didn't see these two guys till the end of the show, was mad because I said his necklace looked like some anal fucking beads.
Yeah, I just want you to take her. I just want you to take her.
Or what? Or what, motherfucker? Lick my asshole. How about that? Fucking piece of shit. That's why nobody likes fucking police, because they all
That's okay, ma'am. I don't worry about that.
idiots in this fucking town. I didn't spit on you, motherfucker. It's an illusion.
Oh, she tried to spit on me. She just couldn't pull it off.
Smell my shoe, bitch. Fucking piece of shit, scum. Oh, you're gonna tease me? What are you teasing me for?
I'm not teasing you.
I'm not doing shit. Oh, you arrested me for what?
Spit on him.
No, I didn't.
You just tried to spit on him.
Any videotape.
You just tried to spit on him. Thanks, Will.
I just tried. Can I put my shoe on?
No, you can't.
I just tried. Wait, I just tried to spit on somebody? I just tried to spit on somebody? So you're going to arrest me for that? Because I just tried?
Stop.
For what? What's that called? What's that called? What's that called? What's that called? Assault? What's it called? Assault? Show me videotape. You can't. That's why everybody hates you guys. Because you can't prove it. You fucking piece of shit. Yes, I have ID on me. I'm not a fucking piece of shit like you. That just gets a badge because I earned it. Fucking idiot.
As a black man, I'm used to having eyes on me, and I've never felt like this in my entire life. Within a few days of posting the shirt story, if you would, I've received hate mail, death threats. People will say, oh, he's the N-word, or he's this, or he's that, go hang yourself. People don't actually understand things unless you somehow try to turn a mirror on them or ask them to walk in other people's shoes. My first reaction to the shirt was actually a guy who thought it was a Redskins shirt, I imagine, because his first thing he said to me was, "Go Skins." So, like any New Yorker, I simply said, "Nah." And he responded by calling me an asshole and kept walking. An older white woman actually stopped me and asked me why I was wearing this shirt. And I said to her, "What's the problem with the shirt?" She said, "It's disrespectful. Why are you wearing such a disrespectful shirt?" So I responded and said, "If it was the actual team shirt or some other apparel from the team, would you be mad?" She said, "No, because that's the logo and that's the brand, so I wouldn't be mad." There's a group of white guys across the street looking at me, no big deal, as they're walking across. One of them points at me, and then after that, they start posturing as if they're going to come over to me. And one of the guys actually stopped the rest of the other two guys and I guess told them it's not that serious and to keep on walking. It was quite a surprise that seemingly people were ready to come have some type of actual altercation with me over my shirt. Caucasians is not a derogatory term. The image of a white man is not disparaging. There's no negative thing about the shirt. As opposed to the Redskins, that's an actual racial slur. The image of a Native American with red skin is actually disparaging. But if you're a white person in America or globally, you've never felt this before. So even if it's not a one-for-one, there's still a level of you don't have a right to do it, as if people of color, people from certain marginalized communities don't have the agency or space to make you feel the exact same way. How dare they have the audacity?
So we need to address the elephant in the room. Your t-shirt is dominating the social media conversation right now amongst our viewers. What motivated you to wear it?
It was clean. Like, I think number one, the fact that it was clean was a good start. The other part is I really like the shirt. I think it's funny. It's just like the Cleveland Indian shirt, like exactly the same as the Cleveland Indian shirt with just one small change.
Yeah.
That's it.
I like the money sign there.
I think the money sign is very helpful because people still buy this stuff. Like the reason they won't get rid of Chief Wahoo, which is completely indefensible, is because they can still sell stuff with it. They can say they're going to de-emphasize it, but then they're just going to set money on fire. So yeah, I just thought it was the exact same thing, and I could see the value in the design. So I was like, hey, we might as well give this a run.
I think more thought went into it. I think you were trying to make some kind of statement.
I mean, the statement is obvious. Like, this is the same thing. Like, what we have here, this is the same thing that goes on with the logo for the Cleveland Indians, right? So, like, to have a problem with the logo of this would be to have a problem with the Indians. But if you're quiet about the Indians and now you got something to say about my shirt, I think it's time for introspection.
For history. This Midwestern housewife, like a lot of white Americans, does not think the Negroes should present history's bill to her.
We hear so much about the slavery. 300 years ago, our grandfathers were slaves, or 200 years ago, our grandfathers were slaves. Well, for God's sakes, did we have anything to do with that? I had no part in it. I had no slaves. My folks didn't. My grandparents didn't. Are they blaming us for what happened 3 years ago? Let's forget the past. Think of the future. Build up the future. And why keep hemming and hawing over the same thing over and over and over again? And they say, you must give me land because my grandfather was a slave. Well, then I would say, for God's sakes, find the man who had your grandfather as a slave and then demand the land from him. Don't bother me because I had no part of it.
Across the country, we asked whites whether the main reason Negroes had not made more progress was because of racial discrimination or because Negroes have not worked hard enough. This lawyer expressed a view we heard most often.
We find there is a reluctance upon the part of too many Negroes, particularly among the young, to take the hard and remunerative jobs that must be necessary to earn a living. There is a feeling that for some reason somebody owes them a living.
Just about half of whites in our survey said the Negro has not made more progress because he has not worked hard enough. Only 15% blames discrimination. Some had no opinion. And this woman mentioned another charge against Negroes, that they have low morals.
Their sex problem, let's face it now, how many white people have 10 illegitimate children? Very few. Very few. This seems to be a trend with them. And I often wondered what happens to these here